Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I put up a poll last week on my community tab asking if anyone wanted an explainer on the tariffs as they pertain to the K-pop and K-beauty space, since that's mainly what I talk about. I have these two whiteboard markers and a whiteboard, so let's get started. This is all about the tariffs, or everything you need to know about the tariffs if you're interested in the same stuff that I'm interested in. Now, here's a disclaimer. I'm not in the government and I'm not an economist. I just have a business degree and I did some reading. So if this seems a little disorganized, that's why. Not to mention, things are changing pretty much every day. If you're even attempting to keep up with the news, you probably already know how overwhelming it is. And by the time I put this video up, who knows? Things might have changed again. But let's start by talking about what is a tariff. A tariff essentially functions as an extra tax on certain imports. Wikipedia defines a tariff as an import tax, or tariff is a duty imposed by a national government on imports of goods and is paid by the importer. So it's added to certain consumer goods or even just raw materials and is in theory paid by the importer, but of course, the importer doesn't want to lose money. So, as a general rule, any extra price that's paid by the importer is eventually going to be passed down to the consumer. So, now let's discuss how tariffs work. Generally, they're applied to some countries and not others, but in this case, Trump kind of just went with a shotgun approach and placed a tariff on all imports coming into the US, regardless of which country they're coming from. Even some islands that are only inhabited by penguins and no people. It's a decision that really makes no sense to me, but that's not the point of this video. Now, let's discuss how this applies to K-pop specifically. While K-pop is of course mainly a music industry, and I highly doubt the tariffs are going to cause Spotify to raise their prices, although you really never know, it is also a collecting hobby. A lot of people like to collect albums and photo cards and that kind of stuff. Currently, South Korea is sitting at a 10% tariff rate. That's down from the original 25%, which is one of the highest tariffs that a US ally has ever seen. And the reason that it went down is because on the day that the tariffs were announced, the stock market tanked astronomically. Like, almost as bad as it's ever been. People were kind of comparing it to the stock market crash of 2008, which is what I think caused Trump to reverse so quickly. There's also currently a 90-day hold in place during which nobody will have to pay any tariffs, except China. But we'll get back to that later. Let's say that you want to buy a TXT album, and it's originally $30. Once you add the 10% tariff, that's now a $33 album. It doesn't seem like that much of a price increase, but if you're buying multiple albums, that really starts to rack up. Plus, this is only for items that are actually made in South Korea, and not all K-pop stuff is. Remember how I said we were coming back to China? Yep, now we're talking about China. So when the tariffs were originally announced, they were sitting at a 34% tariff rate for most items. Now they're at a whopping 245%. I don't even think that should be a real number, but anyways. Let's think about that already overpriced merch t-shirt that you might see at a concert booth. Let's say it costs $100. Once the tariff is applied, that t-shirt becomes a $345 t-shirt. $345 for a t-shirt. Of course, the kind of insane prices that we're already seeing are partially due to the fact that K-pop is what I would consider a relatively price-insensitive market. People are willing to spend a lot of money to support their biases, and I've already seen TikToks saying that people are gonna buy albums no matter what the price. We've already seen from the increasing album prices, the absolutely insane price of concert tickets, and the rising cost of merch that, yeah, people are pretty much willing to spend as much money as they have to, or feel like they have to, in order to support their biases. That's because K-pop is incredibly good at using parasocial relationships and FOMO marketing. With only 1 or 2 night concerts in each location and limited merch drops, it's no wonder that tours are selling out and merch is disappearing off the shelves. But enough about K-pop for a little while. what's going on with kbeauty? As we know, the tariff rate for South Korea is currently sitting at 10%. However, this applies to products that are specifically made in Korea. And while the standards are a little hazy, there are some guidelines on what can actually be considered to be quote-unquote made in Korea. And that means that most or all, a quote substantial amount of the product must be made in Korea. And that applies to everything from the manufacturing to the actual formulation of the product to the shipping. One notorious example of a Korean site or a site that ships Korean cosmetics is YesStyle, which I believe ships from Hong Kong. That means that the Chinese tariffs are going to apply to products that you're buying from YesStyle. So in order to combat this, some potential routes are building factories, moving all their labs and doing all their formulations, and doing any shipping of kbeauty products all from South Korea. Now, how much of that infrastructure already exists, I'm not sure. And that also means that the 10% tariff will still apply. For any companies that want to avoid the tariffs entirely, for example, the parent company behind Amora Pacific and Seolwasu is thinking about building, manufacturing, and doing their formulations in the US. However, Trump also recently gutted the FDA, meaning that formulations will take much longer to be approved, and things that are already super great, like your Korean sunscreens, will likely have to change their formulas in order to suit American standards. And if anything is made in China, those tariffs will apply. Now, to be perfectly clear, the US has had tariffs on China in place for a while. It's just that they've gone up a lot recently. And the reason that we've been able to get our goods from China so cheaply in the past is mainly thanks to something called the de minimis exemption. Or de minimis exemption? It's Latin, so I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. But basically, it meant that any items or shipments worth less than $800 were exempt from any tariffs when they were coming into the United States. That's part of the reason why companies like Shein, AliExpress, and Temu saw such massive success in the US in the last couple of years. And by couple, I mean 5 to 10. But getting our super cheap mass-produced consumer goods from China and just buying has kind of become baked into American culture. It's almost a part of everyday life for middle and working class Americans. But as a part of this ever-escalating trade war, Trump recently announced that he is removing the de minimis exemption. As a result of this, the Hong Kong Post recently announced that they were going to immediately cease taking any packages to the US by sea, and all air shipments are going to stop as of April 27th. So, can K-pop and kbeauty fight back? I mean, they have invested a lot of money into getting into the US market as of late, and I doubt they're going to stop anytime soon. The US consumer market is just so much bigger than the market that's available within South Korea, so they have a lot of interest in staying. The answer is yes, kinda. The purported reason behind the 90-day hold on all tariffs outside of China is so that countries could come to the table with their negotiations for trade. Basically, the US said, hey, pay these tariffs on your stuff. And keeping in mind that South Korea has an interim acting president because they just overthrew their last one, they said, okay, let's talk about it. Japan, on the other hand, said, no, you're basically just trying to be a global bully, and I kind of agree with them. China, on the other hand, said no, and also take these tariffs on your stuff too, which means that there's now a tariff on US goods entering China, but that's a lot less of an issue for them than it is for us. And the reason for that is debatably why this whole trade war started in the first place. It's because the US has something called a trade deficit with China. Now, deficit sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually really good for US businesses and consumers. US businesses and the people buying from them get to benefit from cheaper labor and lower manufacturing costs in China. Now, the exploitation that comes with that is an entirely different story for a different video, but it's a net gain for the US. Made in the USA is just really not feasible anymore. Businesses saw that it was less expensive to start manufacturing their stuff overseas, so we no longer have the infrastructure to make all of our own consumer goods. So, made in the USA would be expensive and maybe even impossible. So, what does this mean to the everyday American? Well, in short, it basically just means that everything is about to get a lot more expensive. Chinese President Xi Jinping and the ruling party, the CCP, don't have to worry about winning elections, so they're not really interested in negotiating any sort of deal with the US because they just don't need to. And if business A is going to have to raise their prices because of tariffs, then business B, who might not even be affected by tariffs at all, will look at their prices and go, well, we can also raise our prices since consumers are already willing to pay a higher price, which means that everything is going to get more expensive, regardless of where it's coming from. Small businesses might start to fail. We're going to see some serious supply chain issues as empty boats come in from China because no one is willing to pay the tariff prices. And overall, there's just going to be a lot more economic instability. We've already seen so many Americans losing their jobs, and I don't think things are really going to get better, at least in the short term. Of course, like I said, I'm not in the government and I'm not an economist, just somebody who reads a lot. But historically, really high tariffs have been super bad for the economy. I mean, the American Revolution was started over tariffs. The Boston Tea Party? Yeah, that was over tariffs on tea coming into the Boston Harbor. So, as a consumer, what can you do about this? Well, the first answer is, if you have the means, make your big purchases and stock up on your staples now. I know for myself, for example, I just placed a huge order at Olive Young for all of the stuff that I use every day because I know I'm going to go through it eventually. But do keep your expiration dates in mind, particularly when it comes to liquid products like foundations and especially chemical sunscreens. Also, use up the stuff that you have in the order that it was opened, because the sooner you open it, the sooner it's going to expire. And again, this applies to mostly liquids. I think eyeshadow palettes are generally pretty safe to use a couple of years out, but do your best to abide by the expiration dates, even if things are a little bit harder to get. And if something doesn't work for you, try passing it on to a friend and see if they'll pass anything back. I know for a fact that my friends are going to get a lot of skincare and stuff that doesn't end up working for me because I have super sensitive skin, but shopping your stash and shopping your friend's stashes is going to be one of your most budget-friendly tools. But in the long run, my honest answer is just to consume less. I know that's rich coming from me considering how many hauls and unboxings I do on this channel, but in my day-to-day life, the vast majority of the stuff that I'm using is either secondhand or stuff that I got for free. By consuming less in other areas, I'm able to do hauls and unboxings on this channel. But I do think in the future, there's just going to be less of that. Everybody's wallets are getting tighter, including mine. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for hanging out with me and listening to this. Even though it's not my usual stuff, I thought it was really important to cover the tariffs since it really heavily affects the things that I talk about in this channel, like K-pop and K-beauty. And if you're not from the US and you're just watching for that good old feeling of schadenfreude, we're really sorry. This is not what we voted for, and I don't think very many of us want to be waging a stupid trade war against our allies. So can we still be friends? If you want to see what's in that Olive Young haul, I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.